The morning she signed the paper, her father was sitting in the kitchen with his hat in his hands, not looking at her. That was the part she kept coming back to afterward. Not the paper itself. Not the man standing across the table from her, waiting with the quiet patience of someone who had nothing urgent anywhere else to be. It was her father's hands, the way his fingers worked the brim of his hat around and around, the same motion he used to make when he was trying not to cry at her mother's funeral, that told her she wasn't going to say no. Her name was Wren Aldgate. She was 26 years old. She had $23 to her name, and her father owed a cattle rancher named Cord Bassett $1,100 he did not have and would not have by the end of the month. Wren had known about the debt for 2 weeks before Cord Bassett rode up to their porch. She'd found the loan papers in her father's desk when she was looking for stamps, and she'd sat down on the floor of his study and read them twice, and then she'd folded them back exactly as she'd found them and not said anything. Because what was there to say? Her father, Hugh Aldgate, was a good man who made bad decisions with money, the same way some men made bad decisions with whiskey. Quietly, privately, always certain this time would be different. The ranch Cord Bassett offered was in the Powder River country, 3 hours east of Casper. He had 6,000 acres, a working cattle operation, and a house that had gone without a woman in it for 4 years. His first wife had died in childbirth. The baby had not survived either. He was 34 years old. He had dark hair, going gray at the temples, and eyes the color of creek water in October. He was not what Wren had been afraid he would be. That almost made it worse. He came to the point without circling it. He needed someone to keep his house and manage the domestic side of the operation. He was not looking for. He paused here, and she saw him choose his words. A performance of something. He wanted a working arrangement, because that was what the territory required for the land grant he was waiting on. But he understood that he was asking something significant of her, and he was not going to pretend otherwise. "You'll have your own room," he said. "Your own space. I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give." Wren looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her father, who was still not looking at her. "And the debt," she said, "forgiven the day we marry." She asked for a week to think about it. He said that was fair. She spent 4 days of that week trying to find another way out, and when she couldn't, she spent the last 3 days simply getting used to the idea. On the 7th morning, she went downstairs and told her father she was going to do it, and she watched something in his face collapse, with relief and with shame in equal measure, and she thought, "I will not hold this against him." That was a choice she made deliberately, the way you'd set a stone down. She picked up the choice and looked at it, and then she put it somewhere it wouldn't get in the way. The wedding was at the county courthouse on a Tuesday. Her father and her father's neighbor, a widow woman named Bet Croom, were the witnesses. Wren wore the blue dress she'd worn to her cousin's graduation 2 years ago. Cord Bassett wore a clean white shirt and his good hat, and when they stood before the justice of the peace, she noticed that he'd shaved that morning, and she thought, absurdly, that she appreciated the effort. He shook her father's hand afterward. He helped Bet Croom with her coat. He carried Wren's 2 bags to the truck himself without being asked, and when she reached for one, he said, "I've got them," simply, without making it a statement about anything. They drove east for 3 hours. She watched the country change out the window, the scrub giving way to open grassland, the sky getting bigger, the way it did when you got out past the mountains. She had grown up in Casper. She had never lived anywhere without the mountains at her back. This felt like being set down in the middle of something with no edge to it. "The hands eat in the bunkhouse," Cord said at some point. "But there's a table in the kitchen if you'd rather." "I don't have a preference." "Kitchen," she said. "All right." That was most of the conversation. The house was larger than she'd expected. 2 stories, white clapboard, a porch that ran the length of the front. Inside it was clean but spare, in the way houses get when no one's paying real attention to them. Functional, everything in its place, but none of it chosen. The curtains were the wrong color for the light. There were no plants anywhere. He showed her the kitchen, the parlor, the room that had been a sitting room, and he said she could use however she liked. Then he took her upstairs and showed her a room at the end of the hall with its own window facing east. There was a bed, a dresser, a good rag rug on the floor. "I'm just down there," he said, nodding toward the other end of the hall. "If you need anything." "Thank you," she said. He went back downstairs and she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the window. The light was coming in low and gold. Outside, she could hear cattle in the distance, and somewhere close, a meadowlark. She had not cried yet. She didn't think she was going to. The first week was the hardest, and not for the reasons she'd expected. She had expected to feel afraid of him. She'd prepared for that, had thought about how to manage it, how to keep herself small and careful and give him no reason for anger. That was the shape the fear had taken in the days before the wedding. The specific fear of a man in his own house, far from anyone, who had all the authority and none of the witnesses. But Cord Bassett was not that kind of man, and once she understood that, the fear didn't go away. It just changed shape into something more confusing. He came to breakfast at 6 every morning and ate what she put in front of him without complaint. He thanked her. Not every morning, not performatively, but sometimes he'd look up from his plate and say, "Good coffee," or "That's better than I've had in a while," and she could tell from the way he said it that he meant it, and that was all he meant by it. He was not trying to soften her up or earn something. He was just a man who believed in saying true things when they occurred to him. He didn't come into the kitchen to hover. He didn't check on what she was doing or offer opinions on how it should be done. When she rearranged the pantry on the 4th day, she'd had to, it made no sense. Everything was in the wrong order for how a kitchen actually gets used. He noticed that evening and didn't say anything, except, later, when he was getting a glass of water, "Makes sense, doing it that way." That was all. She thought about that comment longer than was probably reasonable. The second week, she started to learn the shape of the operation. Not because anyone asked her to, but because she needed to understand what she was managing. She went out in the mornings after breakfast and watched. One of the hands, an older man named Gus Fowler, who'd been with Cord for 11 years, saw her watching the branding operation from the fence rail and came over and explained what they were doing without being asked, in the patient way of someone who thinks knowledge is worth passing on. "He's particular about the calves," Gus said. "Some ranchers, they rush it. He doesn't." "Why does it matter?" she asked. "Animal's going to remember how it's treated when it's small," Gus said. "That's what he says. I think it matters for other reasons too, but that's what he says." She turned that over in her mind for a few days. There were other hands, younger men, polite but careful around her in the way men are when they're not sure what the rules are yet. She didn't push. She learned their names. She kept the coffee hot in the afternoons when they came in off the range and started leaving biscuits or cornbread on the kitchen table around 3 o'clock, and within a week they were coming in and taking them without asking, which meant they'd decided she was part of the place. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. The first time she and Cord had a real conversation was about the garden. There was a kitchen garden off the east side of the house that had been left to go to seed. She'd been looking at it for 2 weeks, working out in her head what it would take. When she mentioned at dinner one evening that she'd like to put it back in order, if he didn't mind. He looked up from his plate. "Didn't think there was anything out there worth saving. There's an old rhubarb crown that's still going. And the soil's good, it's just been neglected. Give me the season and I can have it producing by fall." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What would you need?" "Seed, mostly, some compost. A couple hours with whoever can run the tiller. I'll send Gus over Thursday morning, thank you." He went back to eating. Then he said without looking up, "My wife planted that garden. She didn't know what to do with that." She said, "I know. She had a way with things that grow," he said. "I don't, I do," Wren said. He looked up then. Something crossed his face that she couldn't quite read. Then he nodded, once, and that was the end of it. But after that something was slightly different. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't start talking more at meals or find reasons to seek her out. It was smaller than that. The way he'd sometimes pause in a doorway she was working near, not interrupting, just present for a moment, before moving on. The way he started bringing the subject up, when there were decisions that touched the domestic side of things, asking what she thought, rather than just deciding. Once she came into the kitchen and found he'd fixed a cabinet door she'd been working around for 2 weeks. He hadn't mentioned he was going to do it. There was just no note about it. The door simply worked. She noticed. She didn't say anything. But she noticed. The trouble started in town. She'd gone in with Gus to pick up supply orders. 3 weeks in, a Wednesday. While she was at the dry goods counter waiting, she became aware of 2 women talking behind her. She recognized one of them as the wife of a man she'd seen at the feed store the week before. They weren't being quiet about it. The general substance was that Cord Bassett had bought himself a wife, because no woman in her right mind would have him willingly. And wasn't that just like him? And she must be either desperate or stupid to have agreed to it. And they gave it 6 months before she either left or went as gray and silent as the land out there. Wren did not turn around. She completed her purchase. She helped Gus load the wagon. She was fine until they were out on the road heading back, and then she made Gus stop and she got down and walked about 30 yards off into the grass and stood there until the thing in her chest settled. Gus waited. He was good about not asking. She was not sad about the things they'd said about her. She had not expected the town to welcome her, and she was not a woman who needed welcoming. What hit her sideways was something else, the things they'd said about him. Cord Bassett, who had fixed her cabinet door without being asked. Cord Bassett, who was particular about his calves. Cord Bassett, who had said, without sentiment, that his first wife had a way with growing things. The women in that store had spoken about him like he was a fact of the landscape, immovable and cold. And maybe he was those things too. She didn't know him yet. But she knew the difference between a man who was indifferent and a man who was careful, and whatever else Cord Bassett was, he was careful. She got back in the wagon. "You all right?" Gus asked. "I'm fine," she said. He didn't push, which was one of the things she was coming to appreciate about him. That evening at dinner she told Cord what had been said, because she decided she'd rather he heard it from her than hear it secondhand and wonder. She kept it plain. What was said, who said it, how she'd handled it. He listened without expression. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Does it bother you?" he asked. "The part about me, no," she said honestly. "The part about you, I thought you should know." He looked at her for a moment in a way she was starting to recognize, assessing, not hostile, like he was taking accurate measure of something. Then he said, "It doesn't change what needs doing." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." They ate the rest of the meal without speaking, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Not the quiet of two strangers avoiding each other, but the quiet of two people who had understood something together. The real trouble came from a man named Edmund Fry. Fry owned the next ranch to the east, a smaller operation with a bigger opinion of itself. He had a lawyer in Cheyenne who had been picking at the boundary survey on Cord's eastern pasture for going on 2 years, claiming a strip of fence line that, if Fry got it, would cut off Cord's access to the best water in that section. It wasn't enough land to ruin the ranch, but it was enough to make things significantly harder. Wren didn't know about it until she came into the kitchen one morning and found Cord at the table with a stack of papers and a look on his face she hadn't seen before. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something older than anger, more settled. "What is it?" she asked. He told her. All of it: the survey dispute, the 2 years, the new filing Fry's lawyer had made in Cheyenne. The hearing was in 6 weeks. "What does your lawyer say?" "That we have a case, that it'll cost money to make it." "Do you have the money?" He looked at the table. "Not right now. The spring calves aren't sold yet." She sat down across from him. She looked at the papers. "Can I see the original survey?" He found it in the stack and pushed it across. She looked at it for a long time. She had grown up watching her father manage property, badly, but she'd been in those conversations since she was small because he'd never thought to exclude her. She knew how to read a land description. "This line," she said, putting her finger on it. "Was this surveyed off the creek or off a fixed marker?" He leaned over. "Fixed marker. Corner post." "Do you still have the post?" He looked at her. "It's been there for 20 years, so go photograph it," she said. "Get someone official to witness the location. If Fry's filing is based on a creek measurement and your deed is based on a physical marker, those are 2 different references. His lawyer knows that. He's counting on the filing to cost you enough that you'll settle." Cord was looking at her with that measuring expression again. "Where'd you learn to read surveys?" he said. "My father lost a piece of property when I was 12 because nobody checked whether the description referenced a tree that had fallen down since the original filing," she said. "I paid attention after that." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll call the county assessor. Tell your lawyer about the marker before the hearing. Give them the photograph." "I will." She got up and started making breakfast. Behind her she heard him gathering the papers, and then she heard him say quietly, "Thank you, Wren." She didn't turn around. "It's your ranch," she said. "I'm not going to watch someone take a piece of it over a paperwork trick." She felt, without seeing, that he was looking at the back of her head. She put the skillet on the stove. The weeks before the hearing changed things between them, though she couldn't have said exactly how. It wasn't that he started treating her like a partner in any formal sense. He was still a man who made his own decisions and managed his own operation. But he started telling her things, small operational things, the kind you'd tell someone whose understanding of the place mattered to you. How the summer was looking for grazing. Which sections he was planning to rest. The offer he'd gotten for the spring calves, and whether he thought he should take it or wait. She stopped thinking of the answers before she gave them. She just gave them. And gradually, without ceremony, the shape of her days changed. She was not just keeping the house. She was keeping track of things. Supply costs, what they were spending against what was coming in, the scheduling of deliveries. She started keeping a household ledger, the kind her mother had kept, because it turned out that Cord had been doing the domestic accounting in his head, and it was costing him more than he realized. She showed him the ledger after the first month. He looked at it for a long time. "You've been doing this since you got here," he said. "Since the second week," she said. "I didn't know if you'd want me to." "I want you to," he said. She found the garden in herself again during that time. It's the closest she could come to describing it. The sense of something that had been closed off starting to open, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a season changes, which is to say you don't notice it happening until you look up one day and the light is different, and you realize it's been different for a while. She was not in love with Cord Bassett. She knew the difference between respect and love, between trust and love, and she was not going to confuse them. But she had come to this place as a woman who had agreed to a transaction, and somewhere in the weeks of early mornings and kitchen tables and survey maps and quiet suppers, the transaction had started to feel like something else. Not because he had done anything to make it feel that way. Because she had looked at him, plainly, without the fear in the way, and seen what was actually there. The hearing was on a Thursday in late August. They drove to Cheyenne together in the truck. She wore her blue dress again, because it was the best thing she owned. And she brought the ledger, because Cord's lawyer had asked to see the household accounts. And she sat in the county offices for 3 hours, while lawyers talked at each other and at the judge. And she watched Cord sit at the table beside his attorney, with the same expression he wore, when he was looking at something he was going to have to deal with, which was to say no expression at all. Fry's lawyer made his argument. Cord's lawyer made his, including the photograph of the corner post and the affidavit from the county assessor about the physical marker's location. The judge asked questions. There was a recess. During the recess, Cord came and sat beside her in the hallway. "How do you think it went?" she asked. "Hard to say." He was looking at the far wall. "Either the judge sees it or he doesn't." "He sees it," she said. He looked at her. "He asked about the measurement reference," she said. "If he didn't see it, he wouldn't have asked." He wanted Fry's lawyer to have to say it out loud. Cord looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "You'd have made a good lawyer. I'd have made a terrible lawyer," she said. "I'm too honest." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but in the neighborhood of one. She had not heard that sound from him before. The judge ruled in their favor. Outside on the courthouse steps, Cord shook his lawyer's hand and said the things you say. And then his lawyer drove away, and it was just the two of them standing there in the August heat with the whole summer going golden around them. "Well," he said. "Well," she agreed. He looked at her. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. "To say thank you. There's a place on Warren Street that's decent." She understood what he was offering. Not a statement, not a renegotiation, just a gesture. An acknowledgement that what had happened over the past 3 months was something he recognized. "All right," she said. They walked the 2 blocks without hurrying. The evening was warm. She was aware of him beside her, the particular way he moved, unhurried and deliberate, which she had come to understand was not coldness but economy. He didn't waste motion any more than he wasted words. She had learned to hear the things he didn't say by watching what he did instead, and what he did was this. At the corner where the sidewalk dipped, he put his hand briefly at her elbow to steady her over the uneven concrete, and then he took it away and said nothing about it, because it hadn't needed saying. She thought about that hand on her elbow for the rest of the walk. Over dinner he asked her about her mother, and she told him, the illness, the long slow going, the way her father had never quite reoriented himself after. He listened without interrupting. Then, unprompted, he told her about his first wife, whose name had been Dora, who had been from Indiana, and who had spent the first year in the Powder River country mostly crying, which he had not known how to address, and who had slowly come to love the land out there in the way people do when something costs them enough. "I didn't know how to help her," he said. "I thought giving her space was the same as leaving her alone. I understand now those aren't the same thing." Wren looked at him across the table. "What changed your understanding?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Losing her," he said. "You learn things too late sometimes." "You've not left me alone," she said. He looked at her, and she could see him working out whether she meant it as criticism. She didn't. "No," he said. "I tried not to." She looked down at her plate. Then she looked back up. "The curtains in the front room," she said. "I'd like to change them. They're the wrong color for the afternoon light." He had been expecting something different. She watched him calibrate. Then, "All right. And I'd like to get a dog," she said. "A working dog, not just a pet. Something useful. There's a litter over at Donahue's place," he said slowly. "Border collies. Good blood. Can we go look?" "Sure," he said. They finished dinner. Outside the evening had cooled, and the stars were starting above the city glow, and when they walked back to where the truck was parked, she didn't move to get in right away. She stood for a moment looking up. "What is it?" he said. "I'm thinking," she said. He didn't push, which was one of the things she had come to appreciate about him. After a moment she said, "When I married you, I thought I was doing it to save my father." "I know," he said. "And I was," she said. "But it wasn't only that. I think—" She stopped. She started again. "I think I was also afraid of staying where I was. Afraid. Told myself it was for him, because that was easier to hold on to." Cord was quiet. He was looking at her. "I don't know what this is yet," she said. "I'm not going to pretend I do. But it's not what I thought it was going to be." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him, at the gray in his hair and the economy of his expression and the way he'd put his hand under her elbow on the uneven sidewalk, because she might have stumbled, just quietly, without announcement. "I'd like to learn the land," she said. "The whole range. I'd like to know it the way you know it." "That'll take years," he said. "I know," she said. He was still looking at her, and she saw something change in his face. Not open up exactly, because he was not a man who opened up, but settle. The way the land settled when the light was right. Like he'd been waiting to hear something and had just heard it, and could now put down what he'd been carrying. "Come on then," he said. "It's a long drive back." She got in the truck. He walked around and got in his side and started the engine, and they drove out of Cheyenne into the open dark of the Powder River country, the headlights making a tunnel of the road ahead, the stars enormous overhead, everything still and vast and theirs. She rolled the window down a little. The night air came in warm and dry, carrying the smell of grass and sage, and the particular nothing smell of open land at the end of summer. She put her arm on the door. Halfway home, without taking his eyes off the road, Cord said, "The border collie pups are ready in 2 weeks." "I know," she said. They drove the rest of the way without speaking, and it was the best kind of quiet she had known in a long time, the kind that didn't need filling.